Hey, this is Jody Roundhouse at the Roundhouse Report. Please subscribe. I only need 30 more subscribers. Pray, hope, and don't worry. St. Padre Pio. Something came to my attention recently that I had never given thought. Anyone who's familiar with my channel is aware of my areas of interest. Warfare. One of my most popular videos explains Chinese human wave tactics used against American and UN forces in Korea, the Korean War 1950 to 1953. Striking, now, flashback, what was it, the 1800s? Africa, the Zulus, remember? They attacked the British, they made a movie about it, it was a classic movie, I forget the name. If you Google it, just type Zulu attacks British movie, and you'll find it. It's so cool. Basically, the British colonials in the 1800s, now this is going back about 15, 20 years for me. I was a kid when I learned this. I was a kid! So, 15, 20 years, 1800s, all the European countries were settling colonies in Africa. You had Germany even. Germany, France, the Dutch, and South Africa. British. The British held a territory in a province where the Zulu tribe lived. The Zulu tribe were fierce warriors. They fought naked with small amounts of beaten leather as primitive armor just around their soft spots, like their groin. And they used the same human wave type tactics that my most popular video regarding the Chinese human wave tactics used, except different technology, different time period. So I'm going to try to be as quick as possible. I'm already at 2 minutes. This is not looking good. It's interesting, though, if you think about it. The Chinese took advantage of modern warfare conventional tactics against the Japanese during World War II. The Chinese cut their teeth when they fought each other during the Chinese Civil War in the 1940s, the Republicans versus Mao Zedong's communists. They cut their teeth in battle, and they got blooded, you know. New troops enter a battle for the first time, that's called, they got blooded. So the Chinese military en masse, we're talking millions. I mean, the population today is 1.4 billion. So back in the 1940s, 1950s, we're talking millions on each side. And during World War II is when the Chinese really excelled because they were fighting the Japanese. And the Japanese were very innovative with their tactics, especially regarding nighttime fighting and confusion tactics. Wonderful. The Chinese learned all that, and they used it against us. I'll tell you about it. I took some notes. It's not long. Look, it's not long. But I ramble. I'll deal with it chronologically. Thank you, God. Okay, so Africa. The British had a fort in Africa. Again, I don't know what part of Africa. I would need to Google it. It's wherever the Zulus were. The Zulu tribe. They were huge. Like an empire, but they were like Stone Age technology and their weapons and stuff. And war paint, all that. So the British had trading outposts maybe on the coast. I don't know. I'd have to look on a map. And they had a military garrison, I guess, as a quick reaction force, maybe for a trading post. And the Zulus were like, WTF? Who are these people? I don't know if the black Zulus had ever even seen a white person when the British first popped onto their scene. So, my back, I gotta get comfortable. The Zulu chieftain, I forget the name, he said, okay, you compare him to Mao Zedong only in the sense that he made the decisions. Don't compare them ethically. Completely different. The leader of the Zulu Empire was like, no, who are these people? They're not coming up into our empire. Just like the Chinese under Mao said during North Korea in the 1950s to the US, no, You're not going to come up into North Korea and land and leave troops there in a garrison like the British did, because you may attack us. As Chinese thought that the real reason for the Korean War was for us to establish a launch point on their border to attack communist China. Remember, this is the Cold War. Anyhow, the Zulus were attacking a fort, a static position. It didn't move. In the 1800s, primitive colonial warfare is a lot of static positioning in Africa when it comes to bastions and forts and strongholds. So the Zulus didn't need to break open any flanks. All the British troops were inside the fort. They had no scouts on the outskirts, and if they did have scouting parties out, they were killed. So there were no flank breaks that were needed. The Chinese used flanks in the Korean War to great effect. Just like in ancient warfare, because the Zulus fought in the ways of ancient warfare. Fierce warriors, almost Celtic, but not as good, not as big and strong. But like the Vikings, you know, except the Vikings were way better. But anyhow, the Vikings used axes. So anyhow, the Zulu army. Their king was like, "What's going on?" He sent an army. This Zulu army was about, if I recall correctly, 10,000 strong. But I would need to double check that source. 10,000 Zulu warriors, mostly naked, with loincloths, spears, clubs, primitive shields made out of like wildebeest hide or something, you know. War paint on their faces, drums, just like the Celts and the Romans in England. One morning, the sun rose at dawn, and the British sentries suddenly saw on the horizon all around their fort, surrounding them on the ridge, because the fort was built inside of a valley, probably in a mountain pass or something. Watch the movie, it's really cool. All along the ridge line, it's suddenly packed, silhouetted against the rising sun with bodies, men standing with shields and spears. More than you can count, all around you, thousands and thousands. The British garrison consisted of hundreds of troops versus 10,000 troops. Figure out those odds, use a calculator, I suck in math. But 10,000 troops, that British garrison was small. They had probably 300, 500 troops there, but the British had modern technology, but weren't necessarily used to fighting a defensive war from a static position. Static means it didn't move. Their fort doesn't move, but the Zulus can move all they want. The British are trapped. Okay, so the Zulus would probe the perimeter of the fort. Kind of like the Vietnamese in the Vietnam War, and when they fought us, when the North Vietnamese army, which was actually a professional army, the Viet Cong was just an insurgency. The NVA, they actually fought us to good effect in Vietnam. We still beat them 60-1. For every 60 Vietnamese soldiers we killed, they killed one American. That was the final statistics source. But anyhow, the Vietnamese would probe soft spots in our fire bases in the jungles, and then they would figure them out and then attack them. Alright, juxtapose that over the Zulus 100 years earlier. It's very interesting if you think about the cycles of time in warfare. Took a class at Florida International University in Miami about the cyclical nature of warfare. Very interesting. So the Zulus make themselves known to the British, and the British probably had, again, another interesting connection. The British sentries probably had the exact same shocked reaction that the German troops on D-Day had when the sun broke and they saw an armada of 8,000 ships on the horizon as far as they could see, left to right, front to back. One German soldier said in his memoirs, quote, something like, paraphrase, I began the morning at 5 a.m. with 12,000 rounds of ammunition for my MG42 machine gun. By 2 p.m., I was still firing. If you can imagine, like, the focus, the non-stop focus, like if you play video games for an hour, how that messes your head up because your eyes are focused. If you can imagine the focus of having to aim that MG42 buzzsaw, that's what it sounded like. It's an innovative machine gun. It scared the shit out of everybody. The Americans, the British were very afraid of that. The MG-42. The Russians were terrified of it. Like I said, I ramble. 10 minutes. Zulu attacks. They did what the Chinese did. Frontal attack. Frontal. First, they probed the fort. Now, the British did not have artillery, to my understanding. They may have. If they did have any cannons, they would have been relatively, well, no, they would have been refined, because this would be post-Napoleonic siege technology. The gunpowder age was long past, so these would have been refined. But again, the base was so small, if they did have any, it probably would have been 2 or 3 guns at most, with limited ammunition. Again, this was an outpost military garrison that the British had during their imperialistic British Empire times. So the Zulus would probe and find a soft spot, and then they would charge it from the ridgelines and just converge on it. The British, I believe, rifled or smoothbore, I'm not sure, rifles, which again, technological breakthrough in the 19th century. Civil War brought that about in the United States. They're forming up firing lines, just like, Civil War, Napoleonic warfare tactics, except the British are behind not sandbags, but their equivalent of modern-day sandbags, barricades around their fire base. The Romans would dig a ditch and put giant spikes into the ditch, 30-foot deep. It's a classic camp fort. It's kind of like that. In terms of primitive defense, the British had probably a ditch network, ramparts, maybe even spikes, I don't know. But anyhow, the Zulus, and the first waves were brought down by the rifle shot. Now I'm going to switch quickly to the Chinese human wave tactics. Look at the video. I'll go ahead and post a thing in the previews or whatever. Like my most popular one. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I use so many diagrams. Okay. The Chinese mastered their shit. They mastered confusion, nighttime fighting, all that. Alright. I don't even know where to begin. Mao Zedong won the war in China, the Civil War in the 1940s. I believe he won in 1949 against the Republicans. The Republican nationalists went to Taiwan, where they're a semi-autonomous region, and that's why it's such a hot spot even to this day. See, all the interconnections with history is what we're all about at the Roundhouse Report. Please subscribe and bring your friends. So, the Chinese, again, the Mao Zedong's forces had won militarily against the other Chinese nationalistic forces, but before that, the Japanese roared into China, and the Communists and the Republicans, who were fighting a civil war, briefly joined forces to fight the Japanese. They learned how to fight well, but in certain conditions. Now, this is Asia. Huge landmass, huge populations. China, 1.4 billion to this day, I believe. Okay. The Chinese army, listen to this. We used a lot of deception leading up to D-Day to trick the Germans. Listen to this. This is impressive shit. Excuse my language. The Chinese they figured that, because we landed right after World War II, the United States military numbered 16 million men. That's huge. Right after World War II, for some weird reason, it was immediately downgraded, I believe by Truman, it was like stripped bare. And it's like, what's going on? Because they were already afraid of the Soviets, so why would you ruin your own military? Well, they didn't ruin it, they just shrunk it down, and we weren't prepared in Korea, so we got pushed down to the Pusan perimeter. But then General MacArthur landed at Inchon, which is a great amphibious landing. The United States had mastered amphibious landings during World War II. I'm sponsored by these people, so I have to put this in the video, and I forgot twice, and they threatened to pull their sponsorship. Kind of messed up, but I can see where they're coming from. Their sponsorship money buys me that, and that, which in turn leads to that for my stomach and digestion, and then this. which in turn makes the indigestion worse. Alright, back to the report. The Roundhouse Report. The United States landed at Inchon, and we beat the shit out of the North Koreans. We won the Korean War. Period. The North Korean army was outmaneuvered. We cut them off and surrounded them and destroyed them. The remnants of the North Korean army pushed forward north in disarray, a complete rout. It was a military tactical brilliance on MacArthur's part. Very risky, though. But the North Koreans were in full rout, and they were going north towards China. They bordered China. If you look at a map. The border along China and North Korea is a river called the Yalu. Y-A-L-U. The Yalu River. Chinese officials and Mao Zedong made it clear, don't keep to the United States and the UN forces fighting with us. Don't keep pushing forward north toward the Yalu River because that's our border. Stay away from our border. Again, frontier zones in the medieval times, you know, the frontiers. You don't let your enemy establish a garrison at your border. That's not a good sign. They could use it as a jump-off point to invade you, which is what the Chinese, Mao Zedong, thought we were trying to do. That was the real reason for the war. So they kept warning us, but MacArthur and other analysts were like, no, they don't have, don't listen. Or some people have argued that MacArthur was using hubris, that he thought he was so good that he didn't have to listen to that. The Chinese snuck 250,000 men. Some estimates all go all the way up to 1 million, but I doubt that. So I'll say 300,000 to 1 million men. They snuck them during the day through the North Korean mountains in central North Korea by the Yalu River at the border. They slept during the day. They covered their tracks. They hid 250,000 men during the day from the United States. At that point, we had split on a 4th Division. Corps 10 moved up the right into the Chosin Reservoir. The left Army Group 8th Division moved left, and they were split from being able to help each other by mountains because MacArthur figured the North Koreans are already beat, so we don't really need to worry about having to help each other. We're just cleaning up. We're doing mopping operations. We're just mopping it up. So it was a risk. They were split, and they couldn't help each other. The Chinese snuck into those mountains, and they got behind both forces. And then all shit broke loose. All of a sudden, the sun goes down. The U.S. establishes its camps for the night, their fire bases, the front lines, ditches, all that crap. I made diagrams on the last map. It'd be a lot easier using a diagram. Look at that video, Chinese Human Wave Tactics Explained. Search for that video because that shows all the diagrams and will cut off like 5 minutes worth of you having to watch me explain it again. But for simplicity, for anybody in the military, you would understand this. Our front line was here against any remnants of the North Korean army. Company attaches to the flanks of other companies to establish one long front line, 100 miles long, 20 miles long, depends. For the sake of simplicity, we'll use they had a 1 mile long front line at one particular spot in North Korea. 5 companies, each segmented to like connect each other together. So they had like splits in the middle. The Chinese, the dawn broke just like on D-Day. Again, striking parallels, especially in modern times. The dawn broke and, no, I'm sorry, the sun set is the opposite with the Zulus. The dawn broke. Here, the sun set. I'm getting back to the Zulus in a second. So the sun set. They're sleeping after they made their camp in their foxholes using spades and stuff, you know. And they had their sentries, and all of a sudden they hear bugles. And they hear trumpets out of nowhere. You know, weird bugle shit. Like the Mongol horns, you know, the Mongolians. And then one guy, I read a big book on this. Very good book. It's called Korea, the Untold Story by Joseph Goulden. Goulden. Very good book. One guy said that he woke up to the sound of horses galloping. Whistles, horns, trumpets, and horses galloping, and he was like, WTF. I'm at the 20-minute mark. I don't know what YouTube's going to think of this in terms of their algorithms. Roundhouse Report knows no bounds, nor does my confusion. I got a prop Red Bull again. They said 4 times per video, whatever. Buys my cigarettes, whatever. Red Bull. That's one of the reasons I have to take Prilosec, because of my stomach. I'm drinking this, but I like it. I need the energy, as you can see. Because I have to be fast. Because modern culture, after a minute watching a video, they leave it. So comment. Probably nobody's watching this. This is just for my own gratification to this point. Nobody's watching this at this point. Now, don't misunderstand me. When the Chinese attacked us, they took massive casualties. It was absurd. It was like a genocide. I'm surprised that The Hague didn't call us up on war crimes. But they were the aggressors. They were used to war from their own civil war, and then prior to that, fighting the Japanese. So these guys, our military guys on the front line, wake up to all this racket and noise, and they hear voices in the distance, Chinese voices with broken English, and they were yelling things to confuse us. I'm over here, Charlie, in a traditional American name at the time. I need help. Joe, medic, G.I. Joe, government issued. Anyhow, before they made their presence known, before the bugles, while everyone was asleep, the Chinese would send defensive reaction forces into the flanks of those companies that jointed together to form the front line. Remember? While we were sleeping, they charged, woke us all up. That's when the bugle started. And they established a blocking position behind our front line. So our front line is right here. And let's say that consists of 1,000 U.S. troops. And they established a blocking force behind us consisting of 25,000 Chinese troops. 2,500 Chinese troops. In front of us is a big valley. We have machine gun nests positioned appropriately. Again, if you're in the military, you can comment on this regarding crossfire and kill zones, but we were ready for anything. Our front line, the Chinese in the front of us in the valley, they started pouring forward, wave after wave, and each wave consisted of thousands of troops. It was completely insane. We had never seen anything like it, even with the Japanese. They didn't even use that many troops, except for maybe 3 times in a banzai charge. Those companies, the Chinese were brilliant at breaking our flanks, getting behind us, establishing a blocking position. Then they would initiate their frontal human wave charges, and then we would be like, what the fuck? Excuse my language. We would retreat, but we couldn't because the blocking force was there. And we were like, whoa! And we started getting mowed down. All right, so we were stuck. We had to fight. We were man-to-man better fighters than the Chinese. The Marines and the Army both fought the Chinese. It's interesting, the Marines, known for Southwest and Southern and Western Pacific operations during World War II 10 years earlier, suddenly in the cold winter of North Korea, Chosin Reservoir area, they would kill the first wave. The second wave came, they would get a little bit further, they'd have to run over and trip and stumble over the bodies of their dead and wounded friends in the process. And they would charge and they would all get killed, but they would make it like 50 feet further. So now you're establishing a field of bodies. Third wave comes, same thing. Fourth wave comes, same thing. After about 2 hours, machine gun barrels melt, okay? You can switch them out and stuff, but it takes time, especially in 1950s technology. After about 10 minutes of rapid machine gun bursts, you're going to need to change out your barrel, or you're going to have to piss on it, or you're going to need to throw water on it. Otherwise, the barrel will literally do this. It'll melt, okay? We ran out of ammunition, too. You can only carry so much. So our whole front line, we ran out of ammunition. At this point, there's probably about 5,000 Chinese bodies on the field. Remember, our front line consists of 1,000 American soldiers. So, man to man, we won decisively. But their tactics, as compared to the Zulus, is very intriguing. But really quickly, the Marines are issued a K-bar, which is the modern version of the bayonet. They ran out of ammunition. What do they have left? Pineapple grenades, K-bars. Pineapple grenades is hand-to-hand fighting. It was brutal. It was brutal. The Korean War is known as the Forgotten War. I would like to see a modern, like Spielberg, Tom Hanks, gritty version like Saving Private Ryan, but on the Chosin Reservoir. It would be amazing. It would have been like 10 Oscars, for real. So, pineapple grenade, see those little things there? This is heavy, and this doesn't even have any powder in it. It's been unpacked. But this is legit. It's an antique, and it's stamped. 7870. So, I scared the shit out of my friends one time. I popped this pin, dropped it, and ran out of the room. That was funny. I was in high school. But anyhow, we had these grenades, and if you think about how heavy they are as you're running, and then we had our knives. The Chinese would close in. We'd have our knives either on our the rifle or in our hands, because again, it was nighttime. You got to keep it in context. We didn't have night vision goggles. We didn't have anything like that. That didn't even begin until the Vietnam War, over 10 years later. We didn't have, we weren't using flashlights. We didn't have night vision. We don't know what we're doing. The Chinese don't either. They just know that they need to fight, and they were fierce warriors, kind of like the Celtic tribes in the Germanic areas during the Roman Empire. They were fierce, but they were small little dudes, The Celts, they were big, burly, Viking, Nordic types. They used the K-bar, these grenades, tossing them, throwing them. So now the field consists of like body parts, Chinese dead body parts. Go to Google, type in Korean War Chinese human wave attack, and then go to images, and you should find a picture of one of the battlefields. Just scroll down. They wore white uniforms, white tan khaki uniforms. Scroll down and you'll see one of the pictures. You could walk across that valley. Let's say the valley's 2 miles long. You could walk across that valley stepping nothing on bodies. You wouldn't have to touch the ground at all. Similar things were said after amphibious assaults during World War II against the Japanese. Eventually they overwhelmed us or they killed us. Period. Except at the Chosin Reservoir, we managed to get out. We had a tactical organized retreat. We were not routed. Remember, our guys were split and they couldn't help each other. Neither side was routed, but both sides had to retreat. And it was the longest retreat in U.S. military history. Again, I don't know why it's called the Forgotten War when so many things happened that were so tantamount, especially the current events nowadays. Had we just won the Korean War, there would be no North Korea, there would be no Kim Jong-un, there would be no nuclear weapon issue. None of that. And we'd have a westernized, Americanized state right on China's buffer just to screw with them. And when the war happens, which I predict in 10 years, we could just launch out of there. But anyhow, let's flash back 70 years to the Korean War. They run out of hand grenades, now they're using their shovels. Their entrenching equipment. They're using their shovels like bats. They'd sharpen the edges sometimes, use them like axes. It was brutal. Battle aftermaths, sources say Chinese soldiers would casually meander around the broken, slaughtered American front line and just casually poke into bodies with their bayonets just to make sure everybody was dead. It was awful. And they would scream, I need a medic, Chowie. I need a medic, Joey. And if it's nighttime and you're blinded and you can't see anything, the Americans are very confused. And again, the trumpets, the horses, insanity. Again, read that book. Crazy. At the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir, to give you an example, 5,000 United States Marines were trapped. It was negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. The tundra winds from Siberia coming down on them, and it was an unusually cold winter to boot. They launched a massive attack against the Marines in the Chosin Reservoir. Remember the split in the mountains? They got behind our flanks. The Chosin Reservoir was right here on the northeastern side of North Korea, if you look at a map. The Chosin Reservoir. C-H-O-S-I-N Reservoir. they were attacked by a army of about 100,000, 150,000 Chinese troops, about 3 army groups, I believe. Sources vary. 5,000 Marines were there alive. By the time their well-organized retreat, though brutal, was finished, they left with about 2,000 Marines alive, 1,000 wounded. The Chinese had 60,000 dead, and that's according to their own records, because we would capture their outposts and we would steal their intelligence records, and even Chinese generals, they estimated that they had lost about 60,000 dead in a 1-month battle against 5,000 Marines. The Marines, by the way, 3,000 of them got away with their lives. The other 2,000 didn't. A lot of people in the Chosin Reservoir in that battle, because of the cold, they'd have to carry morphine tubes in their mouths, otherwise it'd freeze. If they touched the barrel of their guns on the metal with their hands, they would get frostbite. Their finger would immediately stick to the barrel, like putting your tongue on a wet flagpole, like in that Christmas Boy movie. And anyhow, if somebody, like, let's say you got shot, and as you were falling, it was so cold, it was like when you're pissing and your piss freezes in the air. When they dropped, they froze immediately in whatever position they were in. So it was really weird and ominous. Some of them weren't dead, though. They were wounded, but they were paralyzed because of the cold. So the only way that you could tell if they were alive or not was to look at their eyes. Their eyes would do this.